What is going on, everyone? Welcome into the broadcast. Today, we will be previewing a pretty interesting series coming up in round three of the 2022 NBA playoffs. It's going to be the Boston Celtics versus the Miami Heat. I am Isaac Edelman representing the Heat alongside Samuel Reis representing the Boston Celtics. Here on FL Teams, remember, check out flteams.com, your go-to one-stop shop for all Florida sports news. So, with that said, let's get right into it. Let's break down this series. The Heat and Celtics know each other well. They've played each other in the playoffs when it was the LeBron era in Miami, but also recently in the NBA bubble. The Heat always seem to get the best of the Celtics, but things can change now. However, the Heat are favored. The Heat are the number one seeds. Celtics, number two seeds. Well, one thing is for sure, after the Celtics swept the Nets in the first round, which no one expected, anything can happen for the Celtics team. They're coming off a nice series win over the Bucks. The Heat coming off a nice series win against the Sixers. Sam, how are you doing, and how are the Celtics doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great, Isaac, and I think the Celtics are as well. You just mentioned it, the Celtics and the Heat meeting in the Eastern Conference Final, as was the case 2 years ago. And yeah, I'll dive into it later, of course. But after the tumultuous start to the Celtics season, they have been on fire in the second half of the season. On January 6th, it's hard to believe this team was 18-21. They've since gone 37-12, have arguably been the hottest team in the league. And I'm really looking forward to this Eastern Conference final matchup because I think it's only fitting that it's the top two seeds in the East squaring off in the conference final, because I think these have been the two best teams in the East on a consistent basis over the last few months. So it should be a really good series with a spot in the NBA Finals on the line.
Absolutely, Sam. I think that the Heat and Celtics match up pretty well against each other. Both teams do not go down without a fight. Both teams play well offensively and defensively. I mean, you could compare Marcus Smart to Jimmy Butler, Tatum to Hero. I mean, you name it. These two teams will fight to the end. And that's why, personally, I don't see this game going less than 6 or 7 games. So before we, go into our predictions, which we'll end the stream off with, Sam, how do you think the Celtics match up with the Heat? And when I ask that question, I specifically mean, which team do you think is better? Do you think it matters? Do you think one team is more prepared for this Eastern Conference Finals matchup?
Well, I don't know if one team is more prepared for it, but I do like the Celtics' chances, but then again, I think you hit the nail on the head. These two teams match up very evenly, so the Celtics certainly can't overlook the Heat, which I don't think they'll do after that grueling series against the Bucks, which they pulled out in seven. Because Miami, you mentioned it, they're not going to go down without a fight. I think when you compare the players on both teams, Celtics, they have more talent in my opinion. I mean, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, obviously the two stars of the Celtics team, and obviously Miami has a very talented squad as well. But I think when you match up the two teams, the Celtics do have more star power, and we all know how important those top two players on every team are when it comes to title chances, etc. But yeah, I think the thing about it is the Celtics have been, well, not carried by their defense, but their defense has been a huge factor in why they've been so great down the stretch of the regular season and so far in these playoffs. They have the number one ranked defense in the league, but then Miami is also a top four defense in the NBA. So that's why I think it's kind of going to be a dogfight in a way, kind of like an old school series. I think Eric Spoelstra already kind of alluded to that. And what I mean by that is there's going to be some low scoring games, I feel like, in this series, and you're really going to have to earn your points. So I think these two teams match up very, very evenly, if I'm being honest with you, Isaac. And I'm looking forward to it just because of the two defenses in particular, because that makes me think it's going to be a real dogfight, because these are two great defensive teams, never mind what both teams are capable of doing offensively. So I agree. I think it's a series that definitely goes at least six, if not seven.
Yeah, definitely. I liked how you brought up these two teams. Defensively, the Heat, I think they're the best defensive team in the NBA. It was shown they stopped Trey Young in the first round. I mean, it's hard to stop Ice Trey. We'll see if they could stop Tatum. A few nights ago, Tatum had 10 points. He played 40 minutes. That's not good. But then, just this past game, he drops 40 plus points. It's like Tatum is inconsistent, but in a good way, kind of, because
Yeah.
the inconsistent is like average, maybe 20 points. That 10-point performance is not going to happen, I don't think. But a 40 piece, I don't know, against the Heat defense. Let's just say this. If that happens, the Celtics are in good hands. But
Yeah.
one thing for sure, Marcus Smart, what are your thoughts on him? He had a terrible game the other night against Milwaukee where he lost the ball, got blocked
Yeah.
twice.
Game 5, yeah.
Yeah, but against the Heat won't let that happen. The Heat, if that happens, the Heat will take advantage right away. That's just how the Heat play. The Heat are not the most flashy team, but they play hard and they know what they're doing at the right time. So the Celtics can't make mental mistakes. You think that's something they could, keep track of and really keep on the low?
I hope so. I mean, that is a concern of mine, like some of the offensive inconsistencies. And with Marcus Smart in particular, I sort of have like a like hate relationship with him where, you know, certain games the threes are falling and I'm okay with him shooting because his shots are going in obviously game in game out he sets the tone defensively just with his great work ethic, which I applaud. But then he also frustrates me a lot at times when he just like in game 5 made some careless passes and at times he gets too confident in himself in himself and just chucks up too many threes and ultimately hurts the team on the offensive end thinking he's better than he actually is. So I think it'll be important for just the whole team to buy in, which they've done for the most part. That's why they've got this far. Big reason why the Celtics had their issues earlier in the season was because a lot of the players had their own egos and thought they were better than they were. I've seen a change over the course of the season in that. I don't think that team chemistry will necessarily be an issue. But yeah, against this Heat team, they're going to have to limit their turnovers. And that's the one thing with Boston. They have some nights like game 7 yesterday afternoon where they shoot lights out. I mean, what do they have? Like something crazy, like 27 threes, but they had like more than 53-point attempts. So I don't think that's a reliable formula. You can't bank on hitting every shot you take like they did in game 7 against Milwaukee. It's great when it happens, but on a night where you struggle shooting, which could very well happen on any given night, all of a sudden you're kind of relying on your defense and hoping that you can keep it a low scoring game and quiet down the likes of Jimmy Butler. So that could be a concern because the Celtics have shown that they can't be consistent all the time on offense, which is bound to happen. I mean, you're not going to shoot lights out game in, game out. So that's just the reality of the situation. And that's why I think the series is going to come down to both teams' defenses, which will definitely make it interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point you brought up. It's hard to shoot lights out every night, and the Heat definitely know that because they were a bit inconsistent in the series against the Sixers. Some nights, Max Strus went off.
Yeah.
Some nights, Jimmy Butler went off. And when Strus and Butler didn't go off, it seemed like no one was going off. And that's what the Heat need to focus on this series. The Heat have the deepest bench in the league. But in the playoffs, benches don't really matter. But once injuries start occurring, the bench does matter. But even if the Heat are fully healthy, they're still going to take full advantage of their depth and bench. To be more specific, right, you're going to have Gabe Vincent coming off the bench. He may start because Kyle Lowry is injured, and that's where we can start bringing up injuries. The Celtics are really healthy. In the playoffs, they've dealt with Robert Williams being injured, but he's fully healthy now, right, Sam?
Yeah, that's correct. He will be available without any restrictions in game 1. I thought they brought him back a little too soon in that Nets series, and I think that's what led to him being out again at the end of the Bucks series, but luckily the Celtics did just fine without him at the end of that Milwaukee series, and it will only be a plus with him returning for this Heat series. So yeah, he should be good to go. Hopefully, he's healthy the rest of the playoffs for Boston, yeah.
Definitely. And I think that Bam Adebayo really needs to perform in this series. He performed against the Boston Celtics 2 years ago. That's 2 years
Yeah,
ago. And it was in the NBA bubble.
yep,
Way different environment. You can ask Tyler Hero because he was much different in the bubble. But Bam hasn't been his best this playoffs. And I mean, against the Sixers and Hawks. Against the Celtics, it's going to matter because Robert Williams is now fully healthy. He is a beast under the glass. He gets blocks. He does everything well. Bam Adebayo could stop Robert Williams when Williams is on offense, but Williams could stop Bam when Bam's on offense. So it's
right.
going to be an interesting matchup. Again, I think it's going to come down to Butler and Tatum. Who else? The team's top players. Um, but I do have to bring up this comment because Jeremiah is a contributor for FL teams. Yeah, what did I just say? I mean, these two players are going to be the star players in the game. I mean, you got two dogs going at it. Butler, plays so well. He plays so many minutes in the playoffs, but so does Tatum. And honestly, this is not necessarily a dream scenario, but this matchup makes sense for the Eastern Conference Finals. Like you said earlier, Sam, the two best teams in the East going at it in the Eastern Finals. I mean,
Yeah.
makes sense, right? That's what it is. Whoever wins this series is the Eastern Conference champions. But it's going to be interesting, man. I think now we could get to our playoff predictions. I'm going to go first because I'm not that confident. I want you to end the stream in a confident way. I'm going to go with the Heat. I may be biased, but the Heat are the number one seed for a reason. They've got past the Hawks and the Sixers. I think that Jimmy Butler's been unstoppable this playoffs. He's just a different breed in the playoffs when you compare him to the regular season. I think Bam's finally going to settle in. I think that Hero is going to settle in. We'll see what happens with Larry and his injury status. But when it comes to the Celtics, I think that he could stop the Celtics. The Celtics are inconsistent on offense. And against a team like the Heat, I don't know. I mean, Tatum shows up when he needs to, but sometimes he doesn't. Like that 10-point performance is lingering in the back of my head, right? 40 minutes, 10 points. It's just in the back of my head. And I'm just not confident, but I'm also not confident in my prediction. I'm going to say it though. Heat in 7. I just think that the Heat are going to win this series, but it's going to take 7 games. These two teams have dogs. They're going to fight until the final buzzer. Heat in 7. What about you, Sam?
Yeah, that's fair enough. I'm also gonna say it goes 7 games, but I got to take the Boston
Okay.
Celtics in this one, Isaac. It's a split, but I think we both agree that this is gonna go the distance. It's gonna be a great battle. Yeah, and I think Celtics in 7 for a few reasons. I do. If the Celtics had home court advantage in the series, I would maybe lean Celtics in 6. But home court advantage isn't the biggest thing in the NBA playoffs, I'd say, but it is a factor. I mean, first 2 games of the series being in Miami, and then of course Game 7 would be at the Heat, which I ultimately think the Celtics will win anyways. But like, at the start of the series, I don't know, like it's a quick turnaround for the Celtics. Obviously, the Heat have had 3 more days rest. So the Celtics coming off that, huge Game 7 win yesterday, it's a quick 48-hour turnaround to Game 1. So I honestly don't think the Celtics will win Game 1 just because the Heat will be rested up and ready to go for that. And then all of a sudden, Game 2 in Miami, that's a game, Boston kind of has to win. You can't
Yeah.
afford to go in an 0-2 hole, which I think Boston will.
Miami may have Kyle Lowry back for that game.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I think, that home court and just the way the series is lining up, I think the Heat can kind of get off to a good start in this series. But ultimately, I'm pretty confident in the Celtics. You mentioned like that Jason Tatum 10-point game, and yeah, he has he does have some off nights sometimes, which can be frustrating. But the fact of the matter is that in that 10-point game, the Celtics probably should have won that game. They were leading by 12 heading into the fourth quarter, ultimately lost in heartbreaking fashion by what was it, 3 or 4 points. And it was a tough way to go out. But the fact that Tatum basically was a no-show and the Celtics still had a shot, I think says a lot about this team. There's been guys stepping up. Grant Williams, out of all people, was the leading scorer
Yeah,
in yesterday's
he was
game. I mean,
amazing, man.
yeah, who would have thought he would have been the leading scorer for Boston? So honestly, like even heading into the playoffs, as well as the Celtics were playing down the stretch in the regular season, I still question how the team come playoff time would respond to tough situations, because in past years they've kind of folded in moments where they faced some adversity, but especially in that Bucks series where they were down 3-2, had to win in Milwaukee to force a game 7, which they ultimately won. I'm bought into this team because they've proven to me that they can be resilient, and even with their backs to the wall, they can respond. So that's why I think both these teams kind of have that mindset where they're not going to let down, even if things aren't going their way, or even if one of these teams is trailing in the series. So that was one question I had with the Celtics. With facing some adversity, would they just fold or would they respond? So the way they respond in that Bucks series gives me some hope for this Miami series. So yeah, I ultimately think the Celtics will get it done in the end. I just think they have some more star power. If Tatum and Brown go off, there was that one game in the series, I forget which one, Tatum, Brown, and Smart combined for 90 points or something, or 89, something crazy like that. I think it'll just be too much to handle for Miami. At the same time, the Heat's defense isn't going to make it easy for Boston.
Yeah.
Unlike the Bucks, they're going to close down those Boston 3-point attempts. So I see almost every game being real close, Isaac. And I
Yeah.
think the Celtics etch it out in the end, though, and finally make it back to the NBA Finals and get revenge on Miami after 2 years ago.
Yeah. Hey, I just think that the Heat are too good, but after what I saw with the Celtics sweeping the Nets in the first round,
Yeah.
no one saw that happening. And if you're a Celtics fan and you say that you saw the Celtics sweeping the Nets, get out of here. Because let's be honest, no one did.
No,
And again,
I thought I said Celtics in 7 before that series started, so
yeah.
I
And
was
that's even
shocked.
being generous because the Nets obviously weren't a 7 seed team. They're like a 3 seed
Right.
team, but because of injuries, they were the 7 seed. But
Yep.
yeah, that's basically it. Obviously, there was no Middleton for the Bucks, but
True. Yep.
now you're gonna face a team. I mean, besides Kyle Lowry being out, that's fully healthy. Look, it's going to be a great series. I hope my prediction's right. I guess I hope you think that their prediction's right because you're a Celtics fan. I'm a Heat fan. But
Yeah.
one thing is for sure, we don't know how this series is going to end up. This is kind of obvious. If an injury happens, this can change the whole series. But
Yep.
you can't predict injuries, man. So we're going to go with our predictions based on right now and the teams being healthy. But yeah, game 1, Tuesday night. We'll see who takes game 1. And we'll also see how the rest of the series goes. One thing is for sure, this is going to be an entertaining series. High energy, dogs on the court, competitive basketball. Do we see an overtime game? Do we see buzzer beaters? We'll find out. Sam, thanks so much for joining me to preview this Eastern Conference Finals matchup. Guys, make sure to check out flteams.com, your go-to one-stop shop for all Florida sports news. Make sure to follow FL Teams at FL Teams on social media. We're covering all Florida sports teams, including the Lightning and Panthers. What a series that's going to be in the second round of the NHL playoffs. 2 Florida teams going head-to-head. What's better than sports in the Sunshine State? Well, for myself, Isaac Edelman, Sam Reis, thanks to all who tuned in. Have a good rest of your night. Go Heat. Don't go Celtics. I guess, whatever. Go Celtics. Fine.
Celtics, go Boston.